exactly what you want.
And we're on the air.
So like if I do
Careful
that,
what you say. No endorsements, please. No endorsements of any particular products or brands.
Hey, don't lie.
I did get it.
Well, no, you getting paid to wear that shirt? No, you're paying them to wear that shirt.
should I use yeah, used to what? Used to pay to wear the shirt? Now you don't pay to wear the
I
shirt.
just want him to eat.
This is
Yeah,
just,
one.
how do you
These are nice.
Endorsements.
But it's
No,
still
but
okay.
after the fact, you just stay with the.
Almost.
Oh, what did you used to do? We used to do sports.
Yeah,
No,
okay,
yeah,
like,
so it's
oh,
different.
way off.
All right,
Okay.
uh,
I'll give you that.
hold this thought for a minute. Well, that's where I want to go.
Did they just come out with some creamy views?
Yeah, I really wanted to import this class, but I got an A-.
Okay, before we get to the graphics, I want to discuss one other concept of development that we all know, we all encounter, but you probably don't know that it exists. And it's something called the development of regional impact. In development parlance, it's called the DRI, because it's a development of regional impact. It affects a large area. It causes lots of traffic. It causes huge increased loads on infrastructure, which means it's bringing lots of people in. It's got lots of whatever. It just causes increased capacity. And it's typically defined by the size of the improvement or by the number of occupants and visitors. With the what?
So like progress.
Well,
Progress.
but it's more than that, because this is a specific development project that has special concerns and requires special approvals. There's an organization called the South Florida Regional Planning Council that sits higher in hierarchy than the counties, and it approves DRIs, developments of regional impact. Perfect example is something that's, I guess it's in process. We've talked about it briefly. The mall, this gigantic mall that's being built where in Miami-Dade County, where Turnpike and 75 meet. Sawgrass would be an example. The arena, one of the arenas would be an example. Any major, what's called a regional shopping center. Pembroke Lakes Mall, well, Dadeland's been around forever, probably before this concept. But any of those kinds of things of that size is a DRI. And it requires special governmental approvals because, think about it, you build a shopping center like a Sawgrass, and you're going to have people coming from everywhere. I mean, as you may or may not know, Sawgrass is the #2 tourist destination in the state of Florida. Behind?
Disney.
Of course.
Would something like
bigger than
Euro
Universal.
Stadium,
Do they not have
in
Which one?
Miami Stadium?
Where is that?
Soccer stadium.
That was
Right
wrong.
by it.
Would that be something that would be?
I don't know how many people it holds. And I really don't know the depth. I don't know. That could be just
Then I switched.
another
Now
activity
they,
improvement, another
Brickell City.
There
sports
was a
facility.
big deal with that one. I think they were like, they're building it
Tax
where there
bracket
used to
went
be like a golf course or?
No, my location went,
That's interesting.
went
We
somewhere
didn't
else.
really talk about change of use.
Yeah.
Glad you said golf
I'm
course.
surprised, you know, go
Very
to
good.
the,
They just- I love it when
movie
when
theater
people
with,
come up with something
you can
and
like
it opens an
get
avenue.
drinks and food and
Would you call that change?
stuff like a VIP room.
Well, no. See, here's what happens. How many people? How many people in the room play golf?
We should go.
I want to play.
You want to play golf?
I'm on 4 lessons.
How many people in this room regularly go to a golf course and play golf? Okay. How many of your parents go and play golf? Grandparents? Come on, you're not doing any good here. All right.
You go?
You ever heard George Carlin talk about golf courses, have you?
So I was a big fan, but I don't remember that particular
Well, he
bit.
just talked about it's a rich, white elitist thing, it takes up too much
Expensive.
land.
Yeah, okay, so what has happened has been, because it takes up so much land, and because it's become less popular, or because, that's different, because they're not really playing, that's also a client, so be careful.
I'm just saying that's the youth golf league now. That's our generation golf. I go top golf league.
Okay, but it's a lot less frustrating because you just stand still and whack the ball.
Yeah. And drink
If you think about the futility where you take a ball, you take a stick, you hit the ball as far as you can, and then you go chase after it. And you know what you do when you find it? You hit it again. That just doesn't sound like, that's probably part of Carlin's bit actually, that doesn't sound very productive, but it can be very either relaxing or frustrating. I used to play once a year, but once upon a time I played regularly, a long time ago, probably when I was a kid or before we had kids. So what's happened has been, golf courses never made money. They were there for other reasons. They were there either to help the restaurants make money or to help, because it was an amenity to a housing area. And it was a sports thing, and it was something the residents wanted. So, in some areas, what's happening is the golf courses are getting sold to real estate developers who are putting other things on it. I guess the soccer, I didn't know about that. But housing subdivisions is very popular, townhouses and things, or the sell-off pieces. Actually, I think a piece of Rolling Hills, they did that too.
Piece of land.
Well, wait, that's different. That's altogether different, and for a different reason. Did I talk about the dipping pits? All right, hang on. Don't let me forget that one. So what happens, though, unfortunately, is you bought a house, and instead of it being on the water, like on the thing I showed you before, you bought it on the golf course. That's very popular because you look out your backyard and you see green, and then there's a canal over there, and a couple of birds, and maybe an alligator, and it's nice to look at.
In the sand track.
All of a sudden, what's that?
In the sand track.
And a sand trap. And so you said you weren't a golfer. So,
Doesn't mean I don't know about it.
so,
I'm not an avid golfer, but I've been golfing. I have
Okay.
clubs, but I
So-
probably go every 2-3 years once in a while.
so, these people went to walk. No complaint, sorry. I bought a house on a golf course. I bought this house because of the value, because there was a golf course there, and this declaration of covenants said there was going to be a golf course here. Well, you can't do that. And they'd fight. And they really would. And sometimes they'll win. And they'll prevent the golf course from being cannibalized for housing. And it'll either sit empty, or some of them will keep running it as a golf course. So change of use. You mentioned that they're polluted. Well, they're probably polluted because of the fertilizer. Because once upon a time, they weren't used properly, they weren't handled properly. But the one that I learned about that absolutely blew me away, I had no idea about this. We were talking about agricultural lands upstate, in the middle of Florida. And you'd think that it's pristine. It's out in the middle of nowhere, so you've got some cows running around, some trees. Well, what happened in the 20s, 30s, 40s is the ranchers would dig a ditch, they'd fill the ditch with gasoline and arsenic, and walk the cattle through the ditch to get the bugs off of them. And then they just wait and let the gasoline and arsenic drain down to the ground. They don't think anything of it. So here you're buying this pristine ranch land, all of a sudden you have what's the phrase? An area of environmental concern. So that's where you don't build. That's where you put the, whatever. No, you can't.
Roadways.
Something. You might put a road there. I mean, I've actually had situations where, as a result of an environmental problem, I think it was some kind of petroleum facility, and they were able to resell it, but the city put a restriction on it saying it could never be used for residential or school purposes.
Well, how about all the old gas stations that didn't get the tanks removed?
They can be remediated. It's a little expensive, but they can be remediated. And the reason that people are willing to spend the money on gas stations is that they're always located on corners,
But
which is very valuable.
You know, some of the gas stations where the owners didn't get a chance to remove the old tanks and they turned down the building, it's like flat land. You know, there's some corners now that have
Right.
flat land. But
Somebody can go in there eventually, though, and dig it out, and dig enough of a perimeter around where the tank was, and put, haul the soil off to wherever they take bad soil, and put fresh soil, and they can fix it.
Okay.
And it's worth it because it's a corner location.
I see that.
And fast foods love that kind of stuff. So, so I think while you're eating the hamburger, you burst into flames. It's all in the name of development. Okay. Now we're going.
You're not that bored, right?
How about neighborhood take?
Now we're going to go a different direction. From governmental development, by zoning and land use and maps and master plans, to privately regulated development, known as planned unit development. You might know this by the acronym PUD, P-U-D, planned unit development. What creates a planned unit development? Well, typically, it's a master declaration. And the master declaration is a declaration of covenants and restrictions that governs a large tract of land. Think of Weston, for example. Weston was originally privately developed before it was a city. I put up an example here of, this is a site plan. This is a very interesting client that I do some work for. My client is not the developer, but what you might see in these pictures is, you see this little dot here and all these things, and there's another one here. So the client owns a portfolio of radio towers around the country. And if you think about South Florida where we live, and I'm not talking about cell towers either, I'm talking about 1,500 feet tall radio towers that have what's called guy wires, things that keep them from falling over, which is what all these little side things are. And the guy wires have anchors, which has been explained to me as there's a piece on the surface, but underneath the ground is something the size of a school bus made of concrete. And there's several of them around the tower because it keeps the tower from falling over. So, again, most of these towers that you would see, North Miami, you'll see a whole bunch of them as you're driving down the turnpike, they were built out in the middle of nowhere. Well, the problem is that civilization has developed out towards the middle of nowhere. And this is all over the place. So they bought this huge portfolio, and what they're doing is they're selling the excess land around it, because as the cities have grown, to where the towers are, the land has become valuable, and this is how they're recouping their capital from when they bought the portfolio. So this happens to be, and the other issue is the AM towers, in addition to having 1,500 feet up and the guy wires,
The radiation.
radiation, but in addition, something called radials. The way AM radio broadcasting works, this is what I love about what I do, is that I learn stuff that's completely, all kinds of different industries, and I learn little nuances. Underground, there is a web of wires under the ground called radials. And it's the combination of that stuff in the ground and the tower that broadcasts the signal. Because AM radio signals can go much further than FM. You might think, who listens to AM anymore? Well, those are sports fans probably. But there's also news and things like that. But especially at night, for whatever reason, they crank up the power on AM. And I remember when I was in Gainesville, we could get a Chicago AM station at night. You just, I don't know, it's just how it worked. It's how it bounced. So, in doing this, one of the things that we have to do is we have to restrict the development. I think this is all commercial. I think this is all like warehouses and offices and other things like that because of the radiation from the AM. So we have two different directions of restrictions that go with this. One is we are restricting what the developer can build to make sure that nothing that they do is going to interfere with our signal, because that's our business. We're the broadcasting business, and we don't really care about the land sales. It's good for the money, but we can't, forgive me, those of you who recognize the words, the prime directive is not to interfere with the radio signal. The real estate is secondary. So,
Why is that one so much bigger than the other one?
it's just a bigger tower.
Oh, okay.
Sometimes there may be two different stations. Sometimes there's a reason. There's a technical. I've seen it with 5 and 6 and 8 towers in an array, and I don't know the answer to that. So there's two directions. They can't interfere with us, and they have to be aware that it's possible that we could be interfering with them. So there are situations where we allow residential, but with a certain perimeter, and with certain construction requirements to put certain mesh in the exterior walls and such. And we have a declaration that says your customers, your end users, may experience interference. I doubt, our favorite example is your garage door's gonna open in the middle of the night. I mean, you know, theoretically, if our broadcast signal hits the right frequency and hits an electronic item, you know, it's gonna wake up Alexa. You never know. Visible creature shapes. Okay, so, in a private declaration, and I'm using this for an example. So in a private declaration of restrictions, and this is whoever drew this site plan map, we're going to call them the master developer. Forget the whole conversation about it. I just wanted to tell you about the interrelationship with the towers. But in a master development, you would see a map like this. And for example, if it was a residential master development, you're going to say, okay, these are the townhouses, and these are the offices, and these are going to be the retail, and we're going to have some more offices here and some warehouses, and in the back are going to be the expensive houses away from the road. And so the master declaration is going to define what can go in each pod, each parcel, a separately defined parcel, and the individual pod developer is going to be the one that's going to actually go in there and build whatever they want. And it's governed by a master declaration. Now, typically, each pod will have its own sub-declaration. This is private regulation of property. And each developer will say, much more specifically, the houses have to be no less than 1,750 square feet. The garages must face to the side and not to the front. You cannot, the colors have to be approved by the board of directors. You have to have at least 30% grass, as opposed to the concrete. You cannot have ficus trees. You cannot, ficus.
Ficus?
Trees.
Trees.
Oh, trees, oh.
Because the roots, I'm throwing out examples. You can't have
The
stink
ficus tree roots really did get into my plumbing.
Oh, it's a real thing. Yeah, I told you the story.
The roots on the ficus trees, they go towards the water. A year ago.
Yeah, they'll tear up the swimming pool, they'll tear up plumbing.
Yeah, that's why I had when I first purchased my house, the guy that I had before had like 15 trees around my pool in the back, and I had to have all of them removed.
They create great privacy is the problem.
Yeah, he had the trees around the yard instead of fence.
What?
Oh,
Yeah, but that's happening lately. We will see. We have all kinds of, that's a whole, life fly for the ficus. There was a whole, what's it called, for the killed off our coconut trees. That's a long time ago.
Yeah, ficus trees can get very bad.
No, we're talking about, he was on the white fly and what it can do to the ficuses. We had there was a, it wasn't a plague, there was a word for it, and it'll come back to me. Well, it was a plague on the coconut trees, because we had beautiful coconut trees all over South Florida.
They had to remove them.
You look at all the pictures, well, until they've got a resistant, a strain that was, a type of tree. I think some of the palms came from Jamaica that were resistant.
Yeah,
and
that's
other,
California.
but, so if you look at the pictures of old Florida, you see them everywhere, and they were so cool, because like, for example, you'd find them, I remember a place growing up, it was an abandoned lot that had been the stables for the Firestone Mansion, and trees would blow over, the coconut trees would blow over in a hurricane, they wouldn't die. So the tree would come up a foot, it would go sideways 3 feet, because that's how it got blown over, and it would turn and go back up again. And they were just really, really cool.
But you know what I noticed also?
And they're a lot more expensive.
The newer ones.
Well, palm trees that have that curve to them, they're a lot more than a palm tree that just
Well,
goes
you
straight
can't,
up.
I mean, nobody made this, nature made that.
I understand, but I'm
okay,
just saying, like,
so-
when we planted, 100 palm trees in our yard, yeah, we paid, $1,000 more for, ones that have, as
So
opposed to a straight.
So I, when I lived out in Davie, the neighbor across the lake had gigantic coconut trees. But I don't know what breed they were, whatever you call plants. They were like 100, 120 feet tall. And they would drop coconuts, and the coconuts would fall in the lake and float around. Well, one had floated across, two had floated across the lake, and we're sitting by my land in the water, just up against the shore, and it sprouted. And so I took it, and I dug a hole in the backyard, and I took the coconut, little sprouted coconut, and I put it in the ground, and I covered the bottom of it, and I left it there. We happened to be friendly with the people we sold the house to. It's about 12 feet tall now.
Oh, wow.
That was a seed, coconut's a seed. I did another one, another part of the property, I don't remember where that is anymore, but, so, yeah. I can't think of what it's called. Oh, lethal yellowing, there it was. Lethal yellowing, that was the disease. And it just killed zillions of them.
When I was growing up in South Florida, they used to have these, I see them once in a while, but everywhere I would go when I was a kid, they had the coconut, the pine trees, that makes little pine cones. Remember that when you were a kid? That little cone thing that they would, Christmas time looked like the Christmas trees? They would be very, very
It's
tall.
called the Norfolk pine.
Yeah, I don't see them anymore for
They're
that.
cut down because they fall on people. So what happens is they were brought in from other places. I'll tell you when pine trees were brought in. On Miami Beach, there is
On Pine Road.
there's Pine Tree Drive,
Oh, yeah.
okay? And there's a whole row of these, not those, but the Australian pines. They're very tall, they're very big, they're really
Yeah,
nice.
that's-
Okay?
They're destroying the road.
They were there for a reason. They were there to protect the crops from the wind. So they had the orange groves, or whatever fruits and vegetables they were growing, and the wind would come off the ocean and damage the crops, so they planted those trees to keep the wind from affecting the crops. That's why they're there.
But I remember back where I,
Wow.
yeah, but I remember, like when I was a kid, they were everywhere, and I don't see them that much no more.
Because there's houses now, townhouses.
Hurricanes have bloomed down.
Well, not necessarily.
No,
There's
it's
stuff,
wrong.
I mean, there's, especially you go down to Coral Gables, you see old trees, including some amazing ficus trees and other kinds of trees like that, that have lasted through 100 years of hurricanes. And they have the most extensive root system. And so what those trees will do is, as a branch goes out, it'll actually drop from the middle of the branch a root. It'll come down and it'll turn into a support system so that it goes sideways. That's how it's protected. Anyway, getting a little far afield of plant unit development. Once it's up, once it's done, once the declarations are done, it's like private government. You elect a board of directors. I don't know if any of you live in a community where you have to deal with a community association, but a community association is formed by these private restrictions. And it's either elected, it's either, originally it's created by the developer, and for a while the developer administers it until they do what's called a turnover. And it's the same thing with a condominium or a homeowner association. And I decided I'm not torturing you folks with condominium law. Go next door if you really want to learn about it. It's the scourge of the earth. But we've all decided that we're going to live in communities with each other as opposed to everybody having their own castle. And you have to regulate what people can do to live together in a group. So the developer administers after he creates it until he no longer owns property or a certain number of properties are sold, and it gets turned over to the residents who elect morons to the board of directors, and they torture all their neighbors. Oh, sorry. Been there, done that. We don't see a lot of historic preservation in South Florida as much as we would see up north, because our history is very short. If something is 50, 60, 70 years old, everybody goes, oh my God, that's historic. You do see things in some areas where the founding family's home, I think it's Pompano, I believe it's a McNabb family, if I remember correctly. There was a house, and they actually picked the house up from whatever site it was on originally, got onto a truck, which they could do, and then moved it to a park location to preserve it because it was a piece of local history. It can't be more than 70, 80 years old at the most. You go up north, and you go back hundreds of years.
Well, back in the days of slavery, you find slave plantations, the slave masters, houses, all kind of stuff.
Where?
Up north.
Well, no, I'm talking about I'm not talking about that so much as I am in the cities where the buildings, for example, you go into New York City and you go along like Fifth Avenue, and where it may look like a museum or an apartment building or something, it was a single family house at one time for the very, very wealthy.
A single family mansion, you said, right?
Yes.
And a single family house.
Correct.
Okay.
Well, it wasn't called a mansion then,
Oh,
but yes, that's exactly right. And now they're museums, and you can go in them and tour them and see how people, and you're talking about people like Vanderbilt and J.P. Morgan and those kinds of names. So, okay. Down here, there's a few of those. It could be like Henry Flagler's house up in Palm Beach. I think, what other places? Anyway, so what happens
Is
is,
Vizcaya? No.
Sky was a castle.
this guy was built, this guy was not a castle, this guy was a private residence. Built by, Deering. No, Deering's different.
Or wasn't he some kind of like high personal society or something like that?
Well, he was an industrial, he owned one of the tractor companies.
Okay.
It wasn't Arthur Vining Davis, I don't believe, maybe it was.
But how about the other guy that has the other castle out west of Miami? The other missing, I can't remember the one
Is that in here?
Yeah.
It's in the other court. Yes.
That's
Hearing voices.
It's pretty loud.
What?
Are we hearing voices?
You don't hear it?
Yeah.
Probably like a radio or something.
Bang on the door.
Is it coming through the walls?
So,
See if you can open the wood thing over there. Stick your head in.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to be obnoxious going next door and say, shut up.
What about the Art Deco, for example, in
Okay, so,
Miami Beach?
great example. So, the city says, all right, this is a piece of history, and we want to preserve it because it was a style that was designed and developed at a particular point in time, and it's unique. And there's a lot of unique architectural features. Yes, look real closely to some people, but to some people it's really nice and really beautiful. To other people, it's just tear it down and build something new. So, the point of this is, by regulations, by the government making it historical, you can't change it. You can't tear it down, you can't redevelop it, you can't alter it, and that's another form of governmental regulation.
Overtown. Overtown is considered a historic site.
Mm-hmm.
Overtown, yeah. It is actually when you get through the Miami River, in the back, like it's a historic town, Overtown, so you can do much. I mean, they're doing something.
Yeah, I was gonna say they're doing a lot of stuff.
Yeah, they're doing a lot of stuff around it, but you can't really touch much of it.
Well, so like I said, our history is shorter than it is in northern cities that were established in the Revolutionary War. I was in Cambridge, and kids used to go to a debate tournament at Harvard, President's Day, for years. And we were walking down, I was actually walking across a park to get back to the hotel, and I noticed a plaque on a tree. And I like history, so I walk over to the plaque, and it said, on this site in 1775, George Washington took command of the Continental Army.
On the Charles River.
No, it's away from the river. It's right in the middle of the park by Harvard. And then you walk by, there was a cemetery along the street, and they were all Revolutionary War
Yeah, I know what it is.
soldiers that had passed away in the war.
I'm from Boston, so
It was, it was incredible.
Professor, and I think also that here for like there's certain laws where the government would subsidize the renovation of those historic sites if you keep it and you do all this stuff. I don't know what year though.
What
It's
year?
limited, yeah, because I think they have
It
like
varies.
base for like
It varies. It's not, I don't think it's as much by year as it is by historical significance. Like the old, what is it?
We're not gonna turn it down a little bit. I can do it for you.
Sure. You're the bad guy.
Yeah.
You
seem like,
no! At first, I was wondering if it was a radio or something. You know,
Somebody's phone.
if my hearing aid was up too loud or something.
What's going on here?
She's teaching something. She has some video. She turned it down.
Is it amplified?
Yeah, I guess she had it all the way up.
I think I haven't done like this, bro.
Okay, class, we have to make more noise than they're making. All right. Anything else proper? I'm done with this. Property regulation. Giving up on that. We'll be done, right? All right. Next topic.
Taxes.
Taxation.
No.
No taxation. No taxation without representation. So, real estate taxes. Remember, what I've said before, we don't have an estate tax, we don't have an income tax in Florida. We have to make, the government's got to get money. The government has to raise money somehow. So they tax on property, real estate taxes. There's different, I know what I should do. Let's you all have this handy, or only those of you with machines? It's okay, but you have it anyway. So there's, it's driving me a little crazy, otherwise I would put it up there. For some reason it's not listening to me.
Taxation of property, section 2.
Section 2.
Yeah.
So, real estate taxes. Real estate taxes are imposed by the county, which is a subdivision of the state. There's two types of taxation you will find. The most common, what most people hear about, is ad valorem taxation. Anybody can figure what those fine Latin words mean? Ad valorem.
Value.
Value?
Very good.
Added value.
By value.
By value.
Excellent. Ad valorem is very simple. They assess your property. We'll get to that in the next section. And they apply a millage rate. So it's the tax rate times the value equals your tax. Then
Can you say
there's
that again?
what?
Can you say that again? The ad
Ad valorem taxation is by the value.
by the value.
Non-ad valorem taxation is without regard to value. That's where you have, say, a bond issue or an assessment, and every property pays its fair share. It just pays a share of the, whatever the amount is, and it's without regard to the value of the property. Then there's exemptions. Well, lots of exemptions. We've already talked about one big exemption earlier today, the agricultural exemption. And that gives you a reduced taxation on your property because you're using it for agricultural purposes. Those are the cows among the fire hydrants. Other exemptions? Homestead. Excellent. Homestead has a couple of things. The real tax exemption of homestead, the exemption itself, is relatively small. It's only $25,000. Unless you're a widow or widower, then it's $50,000. There's other exemptions for veterans, completely disabled, various different things. It's all in the law. And actually, if you're curious to see more about these tax exemptions, the Broward County Property Appraiser's website is a wealth of information that's got all kinds of definitions, not only dealing with the exemptions, but how to apply and all the technical stuff that goes with it. It's really very user-friendly. And if I haven't stressed this enough in talking about title, foreclosure, and other things, and this is really important, which means you may see it on the exam, if you haven't already seen it, is the priority of real estate taxes. Real estate taxes is one of the few things that can knock out a mortgage. Because the state comes first.
Superior, junior, right?
It is superior. And it becomes a lien as of the first of the year. For each year, it's assessed as of the first of the year, but it's a lien, it's always a lien. It's always ahead of everybody. That's why, many cases, you're going to find, if you have a residential mortgage, they're going to ask to escrow for your real estate taxes. Because that's the one thing that the bank has to protect itself against. They got to make sure those taxes are paid, because if they're not paid, then you can lose the property. Taxes are assessed, which means the property is valued by the property appraiser as of January 1st of each year. That is a snapshot that they take, and they figure out what your property is worth as of January 1st. They do that based upon the valuation, the things that have occurred during the previous year. So, if you bought a lot and you're building a house, and that house is half done, and January 1st comes and it's half done, they're not going to assess you for a whole house. They may not assess you for any of the improvements that have gone into it. They're going to continue to look at its land, unless it's substantially complete. If it's livable and you just haven't gone down to the county to pull your certificate of occupancy because you're trying to play games, they will assess you as a completed improvement.
So they don't actually come out to the property, they just make the assumption that.
No, they do. They appraise. They actually will travel
have
around.
a certificate of occupancy, though, right?
You don't have to, but you do have to live in it. But not. No, if it's substantially complete, and you're playing games, like you're deliberately postponing. Right, you're waiting a week for the CO because you're trying to play the January 1st game, they won't let you get away with that. Homestead. Okay, so I mentioned homestead tax exemption. Homestead's got a lot of different implications to it. The homestead is important because, A, it provides a little tax exemption. It's not so little. I mean, it's made to protect people with if you have a $150,000 house and you have a $25,000 exemption, that's a significant amount. Also, there is a cap on increases of assessment for homestead. It's limited to the lower of 3% a year or the consumer price index, whichever is less. So they can't increase your assessment, if it's your homestead, by more than that cap. That's called the Save Our Homes exemption. It was passed, I think, in the early 90s, and it was there so that the situation wouldn't occur where you paid up. I'll tell you exactly where. I mean, I have a perfect example because I had a neighbor that complained about this. This was before this exemption came into account. So this was a college professor from the University of Miami that lived across the street from me, and he bought his house for $70,000. He was the first owner, and he bought it in a neighborhood called Emerald Hills in Hollywood, and that's what he paid for it because that's what he could afford back in the day as a professor. Well, at the values that increased, this was on a home on the golf course, and it was worth $400,000. Good for him, but he wasn't selling it, and he wasn't making all that much more money, but he was getting taxed on a $400,000 house, which he felt was terribly unfair, and eventually so did the state legislature, and that's why they passed this, so that if you buy that house for $70,000, they can't raise it more than 3%.
All cost of that guy?
No. It's just an example. It's an example of why this law was necessary. No, he wasn't that powerful. So,
What year did they do that? You know?
I think it was 91. Pretty sure. It's a statute. It's easy to look up. So I told you it's called the Save Our Homes exemption. So now what happens? Here I am. I live in my house, raising my family in my house. I'm in my house for 21 years, and I have the advantage because my assessment is being capped every year. Now the kids are gone. They've grown up. They've moved away. They've gone off to school. They're living away. I don't need this big house anymore. But if I sell this house that I bought 20 years ago, then I'm being taxed based on my $70,000 purchase price, or maybe it's now being taxed at $85,000 because of the increases. And I want to sell the house and take the money from the house and go buy a smaller house. It's time to downsize. But then stage in my life that I want something smaller. But if I do that, I'm going to have to pay my real estate taxes based upon the new place I'm buying, which may be less than what I'm selling for, but it's a lot more than what my tax bill is because of the Save Our Homes. So all of a sudden, I'm stuck. I can't downsize without getting really badly hurt on the increase in taxes. So they came up with a solution to that. Not at the same time, it came later. And that's called portability. Portability lets you take the difference between what you're being assessed at for the Save Our Homes exemption and the amount that it would be assessed for market, and take that difference to a new place. So, some hard examples to make it easier. Just to sound right. Let's say the guy in my example was paying taxes based on $85,000, and the house is worth $400,000. So he has an advantage of $315,000. Okay. So he has an advantage of $315,000. It's a little extreme, but it's not completely out of whack. Now, he goes and he takes his $400,000 house, and he has some investment savings, or he takes some mortgage or whatever, and he buys a condo on the east side of town for $500,000. Because when you go from the house to the condo and you go from west to east, it actually costs more for less square footage. He takes that $500,000 purchase price, and he gets to reduce his tax assessment by that $315,000 difference. So he gets that advantage of the Save Our Homes cap that he's been enjoying because it's his homestead, and takes it to the new homestead. He only has 2 years to do it. You can't wait forever. You can't go and rent forever. But if you do it by the end of the second tax year, you can take it and port it to the new place. And that brings your taxes down, and then then in the new place with the lower base, you still have that 3% of CPI.
That's something like form you gotta fill out or something?
Yes,
That's anywhere in Florida?
yes. All right. How can you screw the pooch, as they say? How can you mess this up? You have this great deal going on here. You have this homestead and your tax bill, you're only paying on an $85,000 bill on a $400,000 house. How can you mess it up? What?
Rent the house.
You look at my outline?
Of course, but you mentioned it before.
Okay. Yes, you rent the house. So no longer your homestead, no longer qualifies as homestead.
Or you die.
You're looking too, aren't you?
I-
Jeez! I'm gonna stop giving the outline out. Next week I will not give an outline out.
Ah,
Okay. So, yeah, so that's what happens is, if the property no longer qualifies for the homestead exemption, because you've rented it out, you pass away, or the property owner passes away, the property owner moves. Doesn't do either of the previous, but now he moves and establishes residence in another place. Moves from Fort Lauderdale to Delray or Bladen, and just leaves the property there, and he doesn't qualify for it anymore. Now he's going to take a homestead somewhere else. You lose the homestead exemption there. Or you have a simultaneous claim. This is the big one. The Departments of Revenue love this one. So they come down. The snowbirds come from New York's my best example. What's that?
I said number one. Place, right?
You know what it's
the word?
And what's the exemption called in New York?
None.
Star exemption.
Star exemption.
You know it? You familiar with it? So New York has something similar. New York, I don't know what the acronym stands for, but it's a similar thing where it's like the homestead exemption, where you get special tax treatment for your primary residence. So when the Department of Revenue finds out that you have this exemption in another state, they're going to eliminate your homestead exemption. And by the way, if you've been cheating and you've been trying to claim both, they'll go back and they'll penalize you.
That's not very popular though in New York. Very few people, I've heard about it, but it's not something that was ever widely known.
Well,
But isn't it a certain amount of months, like you lived there for over 6 months, so can't snowbirds kind of...
so it's the snowbird problem, because the snowbird comes down here and they live here for 6 months and 2 weeks, okay? But they never bother to tell New York State Department of Revenue that they don't live there over 6 months. So they're still claiming the exemption in New York State. Whatever it's called, I've been told it's called the star exemption. So whatever it's actually called, they're still claiming it in New York State. But now they're claiming it here as well. And the Department of Revenue, and then they're, you know, people are great. People generally will supply the government with just one extra teaspoon of stupid. Because they're going to be up there for Thanksgiving to be with the kids. And that's where they know in November, the tax bill comes in November. So they put their mailing address for their Florida tax bill at the New York address.
Wow. All they had to do is go to the post office and forward their address.
So what happens is, the first thing the property appraiser says, wait a minute, you're claiming homestead on this property, and you're having us mail the bill to New York? What's going on here?
That's where my attorney lives. I tell them, right?
Great answers, but you know what's going to happen? They're going to start investigating. And by the way, New York, the other way around for other purposes, the New York Department of Revenue is much more aggressive, especially because they have state income tax and state taxes. And I've been to seminars where we've had an expert come down here and tell us all the stuff that the New York Department of Revenue will look at. Yeah, you can have somebody who's down here for 8 months and up there for 4. But when the New York Department of Revenue starts looking at things, when the person doesn't feel well, where's the doctor they go back to? New York. Where do they go for the family holidays? Where's the big house? It's on Long Island. So even though they're living here in the condo 8 months, and they claim they're a Florida resident, where are the photo albums? Where are the heirlooms? Where do they have the family gatherings? And the New York Department of Revenue will look at all that stuff and say, you know what? I don't care how many months. your intention remains to be a Florida resident. Oh, and by the way, Grandpa still goes to the factory every week because that's his business where he's generating all the family income out of New York. So that helps too. Oh, it's all real. Can't make this stuff up. Okay, yes, question.
So the portability, it only works when you're selling the property, or
And buying another one.
and buying another one. So you can't lease the property and
No. Well, wait, after you move, you can lease the old property. After you move and establish a
Yeah.
homestead, yes.
So
Oh, I'm
after-
sorry, you're disqualifying the old property,
Right.
qualifying a new property, you don't have to sell it.
But does the portability works when you just qualify again?
Yes, it's the same as selling it. Selling it is, you can sell it, well, it's very hard to use the portability if you die. But your family can. There are certain circumstances where, let's say husband and wife own the property together, one passes away, the other can use it. Because they were both on it.
Could you switch portability more than one time a year?
In a year, no. I don't think so.
But that's be within
I don't
2
know,
years.
because in order to do it, there's rules. Look at the Broward County website, there's rules, I think you have to reside in like 2 out of 5 or something like that. There's,
2 out of 5
I could be
years.
mixing up with another rule, but there are specific rules about how much you have to live there before you can make use of this. Also, if you say you're going to switch it more than once in a year, you're not going to have a tax increase. Let's say you buy something and you live in it for 3 months, and you try and pull this, the taxes didn't go up.
So the reason I'm saying that is because I have a client, sold their house for 30 years, purchased another home, and now they're thinking about selling that home. It hasn't been a year yet, and I portability everything over, and now they're thinking about they don't want a home anymore, they want a condo. So
Do they already do the portability on it? Maybe, is my answer. Call the property appraiser's office.
I just think they should just stay in it for another year.
So, my mom's house, she has been living there for like 30 years, so super low taxes. She puts my name on the house,
That's my next sentence.
and then
Where do you live?
Hollywood.
Where does she live?
I live with her.
Oh, with her?
Yes.
You live there, that's okay.
I live there.
Oh, see, that's
Yeah.
the one example, that's the exception to where I was going to the bad place.
Okay.
So,
I
you're
live there.
okay.
I put my
You're a
name on
bona
it.
fide- You are a bona fide resident, it is your homestead as well as her homestead.
Okay.
That's cool.
I buy a house, I rent this one out, we all move to the new house. I could port the
Yes.
homestead.
Yes.
Okay.
So the problem
But
is,
then your taxes on
The other
that
one-
house will go up,
Yeah.
so you
Yes.
have to pass that on to the renter.
Yes.
Or you'll have to eat it.
Right.
right, so, the problem comes in, I thought you were going to my problem place, where the parents go to the estate planning lawyer, and the estate planning lawyer says, by the way, if you want to avoid having to deal with probate and things like that, just put one of your kids on title with you as a joint tenant right of survivorship, so if something happens to you, it'll automatically go to them. And so they do that, except the kid lives in Iowa. I'm not going to pick on New York anymore. The kid lives in Iowa. All of a sudden, you have a 50% owner that doesn't reside there, and you can lose 50% of your homestead and 50% of the cap. There's ways around it, but that's the wrong way. So when you said put your name on the deed, I was like, oh. The other mistake people make, although I don't know why they would do this with their personal residence, is when the lawyer says, oh, or somebody advises them, protect yourself. Put your house in your LLC. Doesn't qualify. It's got to be a natural person. It does qualify if you have a trust, and you are the beneficiary of the trust, and the trust provides that you have the right to reside in the house, or if you have a life estate. We talked about life estate. Or if you have a lease for 99 years. That's considered ownership. So all of those things will allow you to continue. Is that okay?
With or LLC, you lose.
You lose.
So you could put your house in a corporation and write
Nope.
a lease to
Nope.
yourself
Nope.
for 99 years.
No.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have, what would be the benefit?
Maybe you want to relieve yourself of liability personally, so that means.
No, but the homestead protects you.
No, but if you say, if somebody wanted to put a
Okay.
you want to sell your home, move it over to.
Well, remember, there's a few things that can apply to the homestead, right? That's the thing, but
Your homestead doesn't or probably when you sell your home, you cash out if you have a lien or a debt or something, you still cash out on it. You can't take your home, but you can still put a lien on the proceeds you're getting when you sell your home.
Not if you put another homestead.
Hmm?
Not if you're moving into another homestead.
No, I'm just saying, say for instance, you had it in a homestead, you wanna keep your homestead, but you know if you ever sold your home, you might have to pay off somebody else when you moved it over. I don't know, it's just a-
Because that's what I'm thinking, I mean. it
If
protects
you
you
sell
from-
the homestead and you're going to buy another homestead, the proceeds are state protected, they stay inside the bubble.
Oh, the proceeds, things.
Proceeds can stay inside the bubble as long as you move it, you know. put
To
it in
another home.
Home.
But if you wanted to cash out,
No, then bubble goes away. Okay. All the stuff we've been talking about on homestead and all that is residential. They also passed a cap on commercial because people were unhappy that hey, I'm sitting here and I'm running my business and I'm in my property and my taxes keep going up and up and up and up and I can't afford it. So they imposed a cap, a 10% cap on commercial property, as long as it doesn't get transferred. If it does get transferred, it gets adjusted to fair market. Before you start telling me that you're going to sell the LLC, I'm going to tell you that they passed a law to fix that because they used to be what happened. People would have the property in an LLC, and they would sell the LLC or corporation or something because they didn't want the property appraiser to see that it was transferred and bump the taxes up because it's an invitation to reassess it as it should be. So they passed a rule, a law, statute that says if you sell the property, if you sell the entity that owns the property, you sell control more than 50%, that you have to send a notice to the property appraiser.
yeah, you said that.
And okay, and guess what? If you don't, or if you play any of these other games and try and hide it, they can go back 10 years. 10 years. And they can hit you with a 50% penalty and 15% interest for violating the law. So they can go back and reassess you 10 years back. It's a lot of money. So think twice. So what do you do about your taxes? Let's forget the caps for a minute. Now you move into a new place, no cap, you get your tax bill.
You find it.
And the tax bill is $100,000 more than you just paid for the property. So what do you do? How do you find this out, by the way?
You go.
Not a bill. What notice? Oh, you're looking.
Tax appeal.
It's called a trim notice.
That's true, but
It's
on the risk of course.
keep it all the way. It's so fun. So the trim notice is your notice. It's called the notice of proposed tax. I don't know where the word trim came from.
Yeah.
That's what I was about to say, is it stand for something?
I don't really know.
You have it on your trim notice?
Tax revenue.
Yeah, there was
and
2.6.
instant message.
Roman
I think-
two,
I think
number
it
6.
stands for something.
Oh, trim.
I'm a little thrilled because my printer ran out of letter-sized paper. The last 3 pages are illegal. It's disturbing because nobody uses the paper anymore except the estate planning people. And I don't know why, because they're stuck in the mud. Okay. So a trim notice comes out in August, and it says this is what your assessment is going to be, and this is what your proposed tax bill is going to be if we pass this budget, if we don't pass this budget. So now, bought a new place, you go in and you get your notice, you go, whoa, this thing's assessed for $100,000 more than I paid for it. This isn't right. So what do? Well, the first thing you do is you ask for an informal review, which is as easy as sending an email or making a phone call. And I will tell you, if you live in Broward County, they are great. Our property appraiser is a really nice guy. He's a young man. He's in his early 40s, young family. His dad was a Davie City Commissioner. I mean, and he is just so approachable, and his whole staff is approachable, and they are so helpful. And I met him at various functions. I sent him an email. He passed it right along to the staff person. They got back to me, and I put a nice explanation. Because remember, I told you that it's assessed as of January 1st. So the evidence, and you don't get this trim notice until August. But nothing that happened in comparable sales or anything else in those 8 months count. You have to do go back to the previous year before January 1st. So I went and I looked at what the comparable sales were in the prior year. And then I looked at my own transaction, which actually took place in the current year, a couple of years ago. The current year, but I got a contract the prior year. And the only reason we waited was we waited because of the taxes of the old place and so on and so forth. But we didn't want to pay double rent. So we closed in January, the end of January. And I said, well, we went to contract in October, we could have closed. And they took it into account, because my purchase price was less than the assessment. And they were great. They looked at it and said, you know what, no problem, we'll lower the assessment to your purchase price. I said, thank you. Then I applied the portability and that got adjusted. So that's informal. If that doesn't work, you file a petition. You file a petition with something called the Value Adjustment Board. The Value Adjustment Board is an administrative body at the Property Appraiser's Office, and they have a hearing. And you present evidence. You could present a formal appraisal from an appraiser. You could theoretically present brokers' opinions of value, but that's not as heavily weighted, since remember that the assessors have appraisers that are doing this. You can show your own closing. This is part of what I did, just to show it. And you can show them the list, which they give you. It's on their website. You could go in your subdivision, in my case, it's a condo building, and you can run a list of all the closings that happened the previous 12 months. There were 4 of them. 3 of them were lower than mine. 1 of them was higher. The reason it was higher, and I explained this to them, was that it was in a different part of the building. We have similar units facing north and south. The ones facing north are blocked by an adjoining building. The ones facing south aren't. And they have a significantly higher value as a result. And I explained that to them. They took all that into account. I did that informally, but these are things you could do in a formal hearing. You're providing evidence as to why the value should be adjusted.
I was going to think that you were going to say it was a higher floor or something.
Well, there's that too.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, you've obviously seen appraisals. If you're comparing two, I mean, condominium units are a box in the sky. So they're usually pretty similar. If you can show that, you know, and higher floors do have more value, but also in this particular property, the different exposures, different views on the same unit have a differential in value because of the fact that one has a building in your face. So I mean, it's reality. And also, when that building was built, it adversely affected the whole line, the value of the whole line, which is great for us because we never would have been able to afford the building otherwise. So, yes?
I think I understand it, but I have a quick question. So if I were to add like 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and a pool to my house and I have Homestead, it still can't go up more than 3%. Is that correct?
No, because you're adding value to the property, you're improving the property, so you're actually increasing it. The assessment of the existing improvement can't increase by more than the percentage, but when you increase the value of the property by improving it, yes, it can go up.
So how do they calculate that? Is that just something that the appraiser does?
Yeah. I mean, a house that's 2,500 square feet has a different value than a house that's 3,500 square feet. A 2-bedroom house has a value that's different than a 4-bedroom house. It's all. It's mathematical. It's scientific. It's scientific. Okay? Moving on. Public and private financing of development. Can you talk about this, Greg?
Yeah, you talked about municipal bonds.
I kind of jumped into it at the end of a session
Yeah.
when people were mostly sleeping, but I want to touch on a few other things that I didn't do. Like the purposes of municipal bonds. You know, a municipal bond is a bond, a debt instrument that's issued by a city or county or state. One of the things that makes them different than other debt instruments from an investor side is that they are exempt from the interest is exempt from federal income tax, which used to make it a very favorable investment for people with a lot of income, taxable income. However, because of the interest rate environment, the spread, the differential between those interest rates and regular interest rates has gotten so small that you're not making any money on it, people aren't investing in this much. So in the days when you could get, a tax-free bond, and it was paying 5 or 6%, let's say 4% for a tax-free bond, that was the equivalent of being able to have, let's say, a 6.5% taxable investment mathematically. So there was a big advantage. The advantage is going away. So what are they used for? Why would the government need to borrow money and raise money? They have to build things. They have to build public improvements. Somebody's got to pay for parks, back to the sewers again, roads, schools, even something like a stadium, a new stadium is a public improvement that could be created by all of this.
You mentioned, I don't know if it was last week or the week before, that Joe Robbie built a stadium.
Privately.
Right.
No public money.
No, well, did they do any changing of the zone or anything like that, or any help that they gave him at all, besides?
Well, it
financial?
was probably zoned as a, what do we call it, recreation?
Recreational activity.
Yeah. But no, he raised the money and did it privately.
Yeah.
Which was a big deal at the time.
Well, I'm
It's
sure.
always been a big deal. You go look and see where the money, and then, you've had more recent owners trying to ask for money to improve it from the government.
Yeah, but he spent, what, like 400 million of his own money to improve it?
Well, yeah, his and his investors. But he also owned the team at the time.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but it was and he was a hero.
No, and well, and the NFL, all the other NFL owners hated him because he put his own money into it.
Well,
They want cities and counties
I
and
think
states to
that's
pay
the
for
way
it.
it's supposed to be, instead of taking over donor money.
So, I mean, there's,
Nobody goes to the markets.
there's arguments to be made as a taxpayer.
Don't they do like concerts in there?
They have the Miami Open, the tennis thing, they have concerts, they have, international soccer, it's.
So, but as a taxpayer, remember, we're paying, the taxpayers are paying a little bit towards that, even though the interest is coming in, but the money's got to get laid out and borrowed and so on. Why should I pay for that? Why should I pay for a facility for a team that's going to make money privately?
That's owned by a billionaire, you know what I mean? So
Right.
it is.
But the Marlon City also, do they pay no property tax or something like that? One of them have one of those stadiums have like a zero tax thing with the county or something like that, where they pay like $1 a year.
I don't know. That I don't know.
Yeah,
It was like one of the negotiations with the thing where they were not gonna pay any taxes for like 100 years.
Well, okay. I don't know. So the other type of public financing or semi-public financing that's used is called the special taxing district. And I'm going to take you down a couple of roads, almost literally, that are, it's really quite interesting. So a special taxing district is formed by legislation. They have to actually go to Tallahassee and create it. And it's an actual taxing district, a private taxing district, that is allowed to raise money through bond financing and impose taxes on the property owners within the district to pay the bonds. And it's used for things like road, subdivision improvements, roads and parks, infrastructure, drainage and utilities. It's a governmental body, it is a governmental body really. It elects district commissioners or whatever their title happens to be. They pass rules, they impose taxes, and they build things. And then the people that live in it have to pay this, and it is probably a non-ad valorem tax. So you see on your tax bill, in addition to what you're paying based on your property value, you're going to see a tax going to the Central Broward Drainage District. But that's not private, that's really public. The Central Broward Drainage District is a taxing district that operates the canals, the drainage systems. They're the ones that operate, in addition to canals, remember there's floodgates, there's structures, there's all kinds of things to make sure that when we have heavy rain, it doesn't back up and wind up in everybody's yards. Because we do live in a swamp, and they built all this stuff to drain water out of the swamp. two very prominent examples. Oh, but and they have taxing powers equal to the government. So it's on your it's on the tax bill, and yes, it comes ahead of the mortgages.
Community development.
That's exactly what it is. See, a community development district is a special taxing district, and I'm going to give you an example of one locally that you may or may not have heard of, but you certainly know where it turned into. The Indian Trace Development District. Anybody ever heard of that? The Indian Trace Development District was a special taxing district that was formed and encompassed a huge amount of land. I used to know the acreage, but I don't anymore, so I may be confusing things. But a huge amount of land in Broward County was within this Indian Trace Development District. And they built, remember I talked about a master developer? They controlled the construction of the interior roadways, and they controlled the installation of all the water and sewer facilities and all the utility stuff and everything in this one area where they got developed, and they built landscape medians and all kinds of things until it got reduced down into individual pods that we used to build out retail and residential and various things within. And eventually, I don't even know how the process changed over, there were so many people living inside this district, and it became so unwieldy for it to be a privately operated special taxing district that they voted to incorporate and create a new city. Anybody?
Davey.
No.
You always use that as an example.
Well, today I did, yes.
Western.
Who said that?
Western. Western.
Western?
Western.
Weston.
Western.
Weston.
Yeah.
Yes. So, Weston's original, until, I don't know, not that many years ago, you consider when Weston was started in like 1983, 84, it was originally a special taxing district that controlled everything, and it was quasi-governmental, it was more than quasi-governmental, until they incorporated and turned into a town. And the taxing district did everything. They regulated everything, they regulated the zoning, everything, which is a little broader than the normal powers, but it was all under this master development agreement, which is about this thick, you see it. Because you do any title work out there, you have to see this, and it's ridiculous. Because that's how it started. And it started with the first, and then an amendment to add this, an amendment to fix that, an amendment to change that, and it's crazy, that's all private. There's another one. The Reedy Creek Improvement District is probably one of the most famous private taxing districts around, because the Reedy Creek Improvement District was created by a special politically arranged deal between a private company and the state of Florida. And what it did was, it gave this private company and this improvement district complete autonomy over a lot of land in 2 counties. And they were able to create their own internal government. They didn't have to go to the government to build roads. They didn't have to go to the government to build structures. They didn't have to go to the government and pay school taxes. They didn't have to pay impact fees. They didn't have to do anything with governmental zoning. They took everything they did themselves. They have their own electric utility.
So we're a sovereign.
What's that?
Sovereign place.
Pretty much. They have their own electric utility. They have their own police, their own fire department, and they do everything themselves. And it became a very big problem for the state and for the surrounding counties, because as they grew and grew and grew, they attracted more and more people to the area, which caused other development around them to support the people, and brought in traffic, which caused the governments around them to have to pay for roads, because and it grew and it just kept growing and growing and growing.
And what did it turn into?
Nobody?
Deerfield?
I didn't get the question.
What did it turn into?
What was the?
The place he's talking about. I don't know. We're trying to
I'm
find
guessing.
Not paying attention? Okay. Bet you most of you have been there.
Coconut Creek.
Nope. Bigger.
Creek, I don't know.
Bigger. Well, nothing, the name, the Reedy Creek Improvement District name has nothing to do with the name you know the development as.
Oh, it's a development.
Basically,
This is
it's bigger than, no,
Because north or south?
of,
Here.
north.
Oh,
Coral Springs.
no.
No, that was actually also privately done, but it was done as a city from the get-go by Westinghouse.
Talk about Parkland.
Nope,
South Parkland?
nope.
Because I know Parkland, how Parkland was privately built, that golf harbor thing.
That's just a community.
Yeah.
Okay.
Nope, that has an interesting origin too.
Walt Disney.
Bingo!
I
We
looked it
got
up.
a- we got a- Cheater! Write that down. Disney World. Disney World, yes.
Wow.
Disney World. And they got sued. Walt came to Florida. It's great. The history's
There
great.
you go, Mickey, huh?
Mickey Mouse. That's what I was doing.
Oh, well, I did Deerfield.
So Walt came to Florida in the mid-'60s, and he flew over in Air Force One. Yeah, that's what it's called, Air Force One. And
Wait, what Force One?
Air Force One.
Oh,
Air Force One.
Force One.
Yes. And he flew over, and he looked at various places, and he wanted to see a place where obviously the weather was good, where there was lots of land, and where he saw roads cross. There weren't any expressways, mind you, but there were major highways that crossed. And he liked it was centrally located, and it was south of this little, not very significant city of Orlando. There were other choices he looked at. It's great history.
Do you know where else he looked?
I don't remember. He looked at other places up and down the East Coast, actually.
Oh, okay.
But he settled in Florida because of the warm winters and so on, and the easy access. And they made a, first of all, the land acquisition is fascinating because when he made the decision, no one knew about this. And he sent like a lawyer or two around with a briefcase. And they would go to individual ranch owners or landowners, and they'd buy up the ranch. Buy this ranch, buy that ranch. Nobody knew. Nobody knew what was going on. Because I think it's 27,000 acres. It's something ridiculous like that. And that's what they did. Of course, eventually, at the end, word got out, and so the last few parcels were a little more expensive. But that's how he did it. And there's a book. I forgot the name of the book. It's a great read because especially you, I think
What was the name of the development? Started with an R?
Reedy Creek Improvement District. Since most of you in this room have a little interest in real estate development, this is something that if you happen to see the book somewhere, it's just a great read. The way it was done. And of course, there's movies and things.
So most of the state came in because, obviously he had a huge plan
Well,
to
he-
offer, employment.
And he made a deal with the governor at the time. And of course, later on, the state tried to renege on it. And of course, they couldn't. He had made a deal. And it was.
Wondering.
Last year I took the part one of real estate development, and we had a bunch of speakers, and I can't remember who exactly it was, but someone had talked about that they were going around, and it was for Home Depot that no one knew, and I want to say it's near downtown Fort Lauderdale, that they were buying lots all over the place, and the last person found out, it was like a little tattoo parlor or something like that, and it took an arm and a leg. He didn't want to go, didn't want to go, didn't want to go, didn't want to go, didn't want to go. But it took like forever to get that last piece of parcel to be able to build
Well,
Home Depot.
they actually did a land swap. You may not know this, but on the corner where the Home Depot sits was the McDonald's. And
Yeah,
they actually
talked
made
about
a
it.
deal
They talked
to
about
move,
that.
to swap the McDonald's over.
Yeah, and Home Depot bought it for
If you
them
go
and-
by that intersection,
Yeah.
one of the cool things is that McDonald's is one of the few around that has the original sign. They have outside, they have the original golden arches with the billions served, because in the early days, they would actually change the number. as to how many hamburgers they had sold.
They have sold.
But now it's just billions served.
Wow. So I think something like that is happening in Coral Gables right now. There's this elderly guy who doesn't want to sell his house, and they built these commercial things all around it.
But that's different,
That's
you know,
correct.
because there is a tract of land, now it's developed pretty much. So we talked about where that, the Walmart didn't go where the Target went on Sterling and University. Diagonally opposite on the southwest quadrant, but down a little further, there was a cattle ranch. And there was a character, it was Wiley Waldrop. And this is a guy, to tell you what kind of a character was, when he had his cattle ranch, he would literally take his Cadillac and go driving in the fields with the cows. Not an SUV, mind you. He didn't have SUVs, and he was notorious. I mean, he would be out there, and he didn't want to sell this land. He had so much political influence that when they built University Drive, he got them to jog it a little bit, to take some of his land. To, you know, he was supposed to go straight up, and they got it to slide off to the side a little bit. There's a turn, like right at Sterling, where it jogs to the west, just a half a block, whatever, so he could take more of his land. So, anyway, he eventually sold it to whoever developed, what is it, Terra. There's a couple of newer subdivisions right there. There's all kinds of stories everywhere. That's what.
Well, and there's the guy buying everything in downtown Miami.
Oh, bunches
No,
of
that's a design district.
Moshi something? Israeli New York guy?
not rock.
No,
Rock's been
it's
there forever.
NN, it's like Moshi
Oh, those are the Koreans?
Nana.
Mana.
Yeah, he's been around for a bit.
Yeah, buying everything in downtown.
There's a lot of, well, there's some of that quasi-historic stuff down there, but then a lot of it's junk.
Well, it's,
Yeah.
like, I used to work in downtown when I worked for Wells Fargo. Well, one of the places I worked for Wells Fargo, and it's 6 years later, 7 years later, it's like everything is closing.
No, but
it's
that was the
dying
same thing that
over
happened
there.
to the design district. Like this guy started buying the properties in the design district, and it was funny because the high-end retail stores had an exclusive agreement with, I think it was Bell Harbor, and they
Yeah.
couldn't open stores outside of that because they would have to share the revenue. So this guy started buying all of this, and then somehow he got them to opt out of that contract. And that's why you see now the design district having all the luxury stuff, and he's so, you know,
Well, I mean, it's
crazy.
So,
I read it in the
a
biggest.
place that's even closer to Bell Harbor,
Amazing
Aventura Mall has a bunch of
development.
high-end stuff in there too.
no. But I've read leases in Bell Harbor. They have a, I can only describe the clause like this, which means that they have a,
Yeah.
this is a simple meaning that they have a commercial advantage over you.
Mhm. Yeah.
Quarter going on there. They have a commercial advantage,
Yeah.
and they really will prohibit because they basically say that we are the finest location anywhere,
Mhm.
and if you're going to be here, you can't be anywhere else. And if you are anywhere else, yes, we get a piece of your revenue from you, somewhere else.
That guy was really
And they're
smart.
trying,
I don't know how he did it.
they're expanding Bell Harbor now.
Right.
And they took a while, like, they were fighting for a while to be able to expand.
But if you go to the design district right now, what this guy has done is amazing.
Oh,
That looks
yeah,
like
yeah.
Soho in New York. It's like
Yeah.
The stuff you can't make it up.
unbelievable.
You can't
But it's a
make it
good
up.
story, like, when it came out of the beginning. It's a Jewish guy, right? The developer of the design district.
I don't know who it is.
I think, yeah, I forgot his name, but.
I mean,
Very well known.
there's been a couple of, developers down there. It's not one of the Robins, is it?
I don't know, I'm sorry, I can't remember the name. But he was very smart. He started like slowly just buying
That's how it works.
properties.
All right, I'm at the end of my outline. Any other general questions about what we've talked about? General questions generally.
Final.
When might you post that
What are we
study
doing?
guide type of thing?
What's that?
That's the way
When
you
might you post that study guide type of thing?
Well, with your permission, I'm not going to work tomorrow. It is Sunday. I need a break. The 6 days a week is a little bit rough on me.
Sounds good to me.
But I'll do it on Monday, Tuesday, for sure. And all I really have to do is, I gotta look and see what I talked about today, maybe add a few questions, maybe tweak a few questions, and then like I did the last time, I'm just gonna give you the lead-ins. I think that's pretty fair.
Definitely.
Everybody seems to like it.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So hopefully it'll be a proposal by Wednesday.
I would expect it. All right, can we kill the time?